Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocalypse Stacy's an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative high school and college here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. In this recording, we're going to look at cantos 4, 5, and 6 from the Commedia Divina of Dante Alighieri. For one particular student, this is a pre-recorded class, which is pertinent to our study, and I will keep my comments principally to that individual for our class on Dante that we're taking, regardless of the vicissitudes of electricity. But for the others of you, this is a sample class to the sort of instruction you can expect to get upon enrolling at Apocalypse Stacy's Institute. I'll have a few words about our college momentarily, but this recording is within the context of our second of 3 courses on the Commedia. The Divine Comedy of Dante is such a massive topic. We have donated 3 semester-long courses to it. The first of those is the preparatory work in the biography of Dante, as well as into the major themes which Dante assumes that we know when we read the Commedia. The second course, of which this is an example, is the Commedia itself, the naked text. And then the subsequent college class to this is on the afterlife, so to speak, the post-Dante career of the poem. The poem goes on to inspire other art and continue certain themes that artists picked up in it, and that the Commedia itself simply transmitted to another generation. So we look at all that stuff in 3 courses. Now, a few words about Apocalypse Stacy's Institute as I cue this up here, and then we're going to get into those very interesting cantos 4, 5, and 6 of the Paradiso. Here on our screen is our excellent website, apocalypsestacysinstitute.wordpress.com. And what I'd like to bring your attention to now in our drop-down menus is the Open Events tab. One of the obligations of a college and society is general knowledge and is raising up the discourse of society. And towards that end, we have our Open Events program. These are various lectures, film screenings, and similar events that we have which touch on the humanities. Now, that's a very broad topic. We might touch on literature, on Hollywood interpretations of this, that, or the other. We might touch on events in the present discourse, in the news. And we don't just limit ourselves to history or politics, but we get into all sorts of things in the arts and in that very big tent, which we call the humanities. So let's see what we have going on here. We have lately concluded a topic on Jack Parsons, the laboratory man, sometimes Satanist, sometimes magician. For St. Patrick's Day, we're going to have a film discussion of The Field from the 1990s. We have another topic on magic coming up in April. We have an open house, definitely something to consider attending. Open house or any of those if you're especially earnest about enrolling. Okay, so with that being seen, Chu, let's orient ourselves in the true sense of the word. We have now entered the final part of the Commedia. We have gone over the rainbow, maybe with a package of Skittles in our hands. We've gone from the earthly paradise, which was delightful, but it was only naturally delightful, into the heavens. And so we have a map here, and we'll start in terms of recapping at the beginning. And you can see on the map here at the very, very bottom part of the Earth sphere, you see the upside down mountain and the woods, right? That's where Dante began this journey with us so long ago in that Canto 1, that dark wood in the middle of his life. From there, we have, well, what appears on this screen to be a triangle, or more properly, an upside down ice cream cone, and that's hell. And that's this like a toilet bowl in more ways than one. It is this spiraling till you get to the center, and that's where you have your Satan there. And remember, again, we're just recapping, remember that this big pit is made when, as St. Luke says, Satan is cast out of heaven. So Dante has some fun with that. And so when the devil is kicked out of heaven, he's hurled to the earth. And like a stone in a pond, he displaces the soil here. That brings us at the conclusion of the Inferno to what now also appears like a triangle. This is Mount Purgatory, and this is made by the displaced soil from hell. At the top of that, you can see is a tree, which I'll zoom up on. That's your tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is the Adam and Eve story tree. So you have that. Now, as we get into paradise, we get into the spheres of the heavens. So Dante makes use of the planetary orbits, and he uses each orbit as a way to classify people, just as we did on the rings of hell, on the cornices of purgatory. So now Dante has the different planets here. We'll see how our Italian is doing. Predictably, some of the best explanations and aids and illustrations for the Commedia are in that language, but I think we'll make a good go of it in our clanking English. So we have the terrestrial paradise, the air of the terrestrial paradise. Then we get into where we're going to spend most of our time today, and that is the heaven, or rather the sphere of the moon. From the moon, we move to Mercury, planet Mercury, then Venus, then the sun, then Mars, then Jove, and then Saturn. At this point, you think we've come far enough, we then cross over into the prima mobile. And we will see here, it's called the Empyrean, as Dante will call it himself, the Empyrean, the prima mobile, we see it written here. And we'll get into all the meanings of that as we go along. Finally, we get to the rows, the giant rows of saints, which Dante sees. And then finally, you get almost to God, but we'll save that discussion for later on. Okay, so back to the moon. That's where we're spending our cantos 4, 5, and 6 today, much as we did last classes. We looked at, well, mostly Beatrice. Let's be real. We looked at Charles Williams' analysis of Beatrice, but in our readings, we did cover those opening cantos. And as Dante so often does in this poem, he carries over characters from one canto into the next. And so what we see are the conversations with Beatrice, with Picarda Donati, and then with Empress Constance in this canto 4. And we have an illustration of that here. And they're on the moon. They're on the moon. Something that's worth bringing up once again is the hierarchy of Dante. Dante's Christianity is very hierarchical. Dante would have seen this in, for instance, the division of the Bible between the Old and the New Testament, and indeed between the Gospel and the Epistles there. There's a certain hierarchy of readings. Dante in his time would have seen this in the Holy Liturgy, most presently in the Divine Office and in the Holy Mass. Certainly with hierarchical figures like bishops and priests and deacons and such, Dante would be familiar. So Dante's worldview is a profoundly hierarchical worldview. One of the questions that we have carried over from Canto 3 into 4 is the difficulty that how can souls be in heaven and have a hierarchy. And Dante himself brings up a question which we as readers might ask. How can we have such a hierarchy? Is it not that the souls who are farther away from God and less perfect on the earth and in their Christian walk, how is it that they can be happy? And so Dante brings this up with Picarda and Constance. Before we get to their answer, it's worth reviewing who these people are. So Picarda Donati is not the first of the Donati family that we've come across. She was part of a family quite prominent in Florence. And as Dante imagines her and portrays her, she was in the convent. And as has been known to happen in medieval times, she was kidnapped from the convent by her family who wanted her to marry. I seem to recall similar stories with Saint Francis and Saint Thomas Aquinas, where the family had maybe mates in mind, maybe alliances in mind with future spouses, and the child entering religious life is kind of going to crimp that plan. So Picarda is one such, and she is in fact filched from the convent, and so she is compelled to enter into marriage. And as some people recount, she dies before she consummates the marriage. So she is loyal to her vows, even though she left the convent under duress to begin with, and there would not have been any sin there to be married. But anyway, we'll not get into the specifics of the canon law. The point is, Picarda represents maybe vows made to God that weren't completely fulfilled, as does Constance. So Constance is also portrayed as someone who was in the convent and then was recalled to the world in order to bear a child for the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, I believe, of Germany. And that child, in fact, would become Frederick II, the Stupor Mundi, whom we've come across in the past. And if it hasn't been in Dante, because sometimes the facts all kind of bleed over into one giant class for me, we certainly have covered Frederick II in the medieval class. The Stupor Mundi, the excommunicated crusader, a very fascinating guy altogether, knew several languages, was very much like Richard the Lionheart in his exuberance and his physical prowess, and indeed in the ability to step on the toes of the Pope and so forth. Anyway, Constance was Frederick's mother, and she also represents, again, vows not completely fulfilled. A word is an order about the nature of Christian vows. So in the Christian imagination and belief system, you have this idea of goods and good things and good actions and bad things and bad actions. But then you have this idea of, again, fitting into the whole passion mythology and theology of sacrifice. You have this large amount of good things in life that can be licitly or a-okayed, right? There are plenty of good and beautiful things that one can engage in. But in the Christian imagination and society, as it reaches a certain pinnacle in Dante's time and place, as it's instantiated through vows, you can also give up good things. So you might have an objectively bad action, which is obligatory to sidestep, perhaps some sort of gluttony or some sort of selfishness, maybe interpersonally. And these are always forbidden. But maybe there's a good, like marriage, like childbearing. That can be given up. It can be sacrificed, so to speak, to God and to a higher purpose. And so, as Dante's religion would see it, that higher purpose would be religious life. So it's a good, in other words, what vows mean, and this would also, in fact, encompass marriage vows in their own way. The goods are permissible, but the person making the vow relinquishes the good in order for some sort of sacrifice to God and some sort of sublimation of the energies of the good. And so, uh, for Picarda and for Constance, they were not able to fulfill those. So their place in heaven on a certain level is lesser. And then Picarda answers Dante's question, answers our question, and that is, are you sad because of this? Are you any less happy? And Picarda, to whom it is given the beautiful lines, in his will is our happiness, in his will is our delight. To Picarda, she also says to say, she says to Dante, that's an odd construction. She says to Dante, that's more to the point, that yes, in him, his will is our delight, and we are like cups. Everyone in heaven is like a cup, and some cups are bigger than others. The size of that volume, the size of that capacity was decided on earth through one's working with virtue. And what is that cup to be filled with but love, with grace, with God's favor and presence, etc.? So the cups, the souls are different sizes, objectively, which is probably the worst word to use for this part of the Commedia. These souls hold less love or more, depending on their virtues on earth and their cooperation with grace, but they can all be, and in fact, they all are full. They are all full. So the souls like Constance and Picarda are no less full than the souls of the higher saints or even the Virgin Mary. That is to say, they are all 100% full to the capacity they worked with on earth, and they work towards achieving on earth. If you like, the soul on earth in life has the ability to stretch out like the wineskins in the gospel. They have the ability to stretch out the container to hold more. But like Dante's theology obliges him to believe, upon death, this will towards virtue or vice is over. So you have what you have upon death. So anyway, in his will is our delight. And in fact, some very literary priest inserted that expression, in fact, into the Liturgia Orarum, into the intercessions of the Liturgy of the Hours in the last century. So Picarda still is speaking, and not just from the Commedia, but from other books besides. Okay, so we have this lot here, and now let's move along here. We have the text before us. Again, Dante is traveling with Beatrice. We talked last class about all that Beatrice Pontinare means for us as sojourners with Dante. Like Virgil, she represents a parent figure. She represents, yes, a love. She represents grace. She ultimately represents faith. Virgil represents, as did Statius, reason, which can take you up to heaven, can take you the journey into virtue, but cannot take you all the way. That's what you need grace, as represented by Beatrice, for. Dante, who wrote some of the Commedia in a Dominican monastery, would be well acquainted with the old scholastic maxim, which was then a new scholastic maxim, that grace builds on nature. So now, having left the nature of virtue, natural pagan virtue, we move into divine virtue, strength, which we call grace. All right. So here's a Canto 5. If in the heat of love I flame upon thee beyond the measure that on earth is seen, so that the valor of thine eyes I vanquish, marvel thou not thereat, for this proceeds from perfect sight, which is as it apprehends, to the good apprehended moves its feet. I well perceive how already shining into thine intellect the eternal light that only seen enkindles always love. So for Dante, love, rightly ordered, has an irresistible attraction if the eye can see, if the soul can see it. And if some other thing your love seduce, which is what the basically the first two parts of this poem are a commentary on. Remember, everyone in hell and everyone in purgatory is there in varying degrees because of their good love misdirected to some unworthy end. And if some other thing your love seduce, 'tis nothing but a vestige of the same. So even in vice, one is searching for ultimate goodness, however darkly apprehended. I'll ill understood, which there is shining through. Thou fain wouldst know if with another service for broken vow can such return be made, as to secure the soul from further claim. This canto, this song, thus did Beatrice begin, and as a man who breaks not off his speech, continued thus her holy argument. Ever been in a conversation like that and the other person won't stop because they're on a roll? The greatest gift that in his largesse God create and made unto his own goodness, nearest conformed, and that which he doth prize most highly, is the freedom of the will. Distinctly Christian idea, freedom of the will, wherewith the creatures of intelligence, both all and only, were and are endowed. So once again, this is not the first time we have intellect mentioned in this canto. We remember Dante's very Aristotelian, very Platonic, especially the past two cantos, understanding of man. Man himself has what? Has a hierarchy. Man himself has a hierarchy. And just like we read in Purgatory, when we came across certain souls who were very emaciated, very, very hungry on that earthly paradise. And Dante said in the face he could read man. And literally, you're the O-M-O, the Olmo, phonetically spelled man. For Dante, again, everything is in one holistic piece. And so you ought to be able to read man in man's face. Likewise, to the point I'm building up to, likewise, man's body bears witness to its hierarchy. And this is very Aristotelian. The idea that you have the intellect is physically the highest part of man. So Dante's going to say that plugs into God. And then you have the belly, the emotive, and finally you have the genitive and the digestive, let's say. And these are all necessary. You're not going to go very long without going to the bathroom. You'll not be alive for very long. And the species won't be along without generation, just like you won't be along without food. But it is given to man, as Dante would see it with the fall and with concupiscence, it is given to man perhaps to distort this vice versa. And so the lower appetites, which are not just gustatory for food or erotic, but are in the flesh in general, whatever those are, the larger things one can do. But what those fleshly interests and passions very often can invert the hierarchy that Dante is asserting and that Dante believes that God has given to all of creation. So getting back to the original point, this is the intellect. The intellect is, naturally speaking, the most godly part of man. And this plugs into all that stuff we said with Virgil and Justin Martyr saying, before the incarnation, that reason was the biggest gift to man. Before grace, there was reason. What in Greek is called spermatikos logos, in Latin, the rationalis seminalis, the seed of reason. So that doesn't go away. In fact, it's enlightened. Both all and only were and are endowed. Now wilt thou see if thence thou reasonest the high worth of a vow. Because the vow is the conscious, the conscious, informed sublimation and renunciation of a good that's legitimate. The high worth of a vow, if he made it, so that when thou consentest, God consents. For closing between God and man the compact, a sacrifice is of this treasure made, such as I say, and made by its own act. What can be rendered then as compensation? Thinkest thou to make good use of what thou offered? With gains ill-gotten thou wouldst do good deed? Now art thou certain of the greater point, because Holy Church in this dispenses, which seems against the truth which I have shown thee. Behoves thee still to sit a while at table, because the solid food which thou hast taken requireth further aid for thy digestion. Open thy mind to that which I reveal. So there's a lot of plays on words here, whilst at the same time Beatrice is still discoursing on vows. But one of those is that the intellect can only go so far, as I've mentioned. But then we have this, right? Beatrice is saying, sit down and pay attention. I'm going to reveal this. So we get to this fundamental Christian marriage of intellect and faith. And intellect can go so far, but now, Dante, you need to digest it, right? You need to digest this reality of vows, which your intellect unaided will not be able to do. And fix it there within, for 'tis not knowledge, the having heard without retaining it. In the essence of this sacrifice, two things convene together, and the one is that of which 'tis made, the other is the agreement. This last for evermore is cancelled not, unless complied with, and concerning this with such precision has above been spoken. Therefore it was enjoined upon the Hebrews to offer still, though sometimes what was offered might be commuted as thou oughtst know. The other which is known to thee as matter may well indeed be such that one errs not, if it for others matter be exchanged, but let none shift the burden on his shoulder at his arbitrament, without the turning both the while and of the yellow key, both of the white, rather, of the white and the yellow key. And every permutation deem as foolish, if in the substitute the thing relinquish, as the 4 is in 6, be not contained. So, and this is my final word on this canto before we move on to our last canto for today, that of Canto 6. Just like you cannot get the number 4 into the number 6 evenly, right? You have a remainder of 2. Likewise, the intellect alone cannot grasp completely, cannot apprehend it. It can comprehend it, but it cannot apprehend it. The mysteries of heaven, and we're starting on a relatively low one compared to where we'll be going, of the vow, because it doesn't without grace, without revelation, Beatrice used the verb to reveal. I will reveal this to you. Without revelation, it doesn't hit home why fundamentally what is the good, what is the ontological good of relinquishing and offering up, so to speak, one earthly good to God. As 4 cannot be neatly divided into 6, the intellect cannot grasp this by itself, although we can kind of grasp it, and there's the allusion made to the Old Testament Israel, or the Hebrews, right? I mean, they had a concept of sacrifice, but it wasn't a complete understanding of sacrifice, and the sacrifice itself, the animal sacrifices and the others, were themselves not complete. Just like 4 can at least once go into 6, there's still a hangnail. There's still a remainder. So, okay, that's Canto 5 there, and now we'll move along here to Canto 6. Now we switch themes. We get to Justinian. We'll get an image up of him. We're moving into rulers. Dante is not a libertarian. Dante is the opposite of a libertarian. So Justinian for Dante represents one of a number of righteous rulers. In a certain way, he represents the apotheosis of what is begun with Constantine. So here is a fabulous looking Justinian. Here we'll get the famous image of him up on the screen here. So, all right. So he was the emperor of Rome in the 6th century. The part of Rome in the west, which we call Byzantium, after the West had fallen, in the West, we call the rump of the Roman Empire around what we call Turkey and the Black Sea. And the Balkans, we call that the Byzantine Empire. So Justinian's basically the emperor there at about the advent of Islam, a little bit beforehand, in fact, but that neighborhood. And indeed, he represents the flowering of the whole idea of the Christian emperor. Again, getting into not just themes with Constantine, who founds Justinian's capital of Constantinople or renovates it from Byzantium to the previous settlement nearby. But Justinian also, really brings to bear a lot of the Christian identity of Byzantium, including a building with a Hod on his shoulder. In fact, the Hagia Sophia, with, of course, lots of other labor, voluntary and otherwise. But Justinian was there in his work clothes helping to build this cathedral. And in addition, Justinian represents on a martial level an attempt to revive the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire has all these spikes, as anyone who studied it will know, throughout its history. So there are these times of tremendous reform. One of those would be going way back. Well, one of those would be Augustus. Another, whom we'll meet in the Paradiso. Another would be Marcus Aurelius. Another would be, oddly enough, not going to be found in Dante's heaven, but Diocletian was actually one of the greatest Roman emperors in terms of reforming the empire. And then Justinian. He would be in a small clique of Roman emperors who really revived the experiment, shall we say. And finally, the last area, maybe the most enduring area, where Justinian's Christian vision of empire, which Dante is lauding in Canto 6, is brought to bear, is in the reform of the legal code, which he affected. I should say on the middle note there of territorial holdings, Justinian, or rather his general, who you can kind of see half of his face here, Belisarius, did a lot to try and affected a lot of recapture of Western territory. For a hot second there, it looks like Rome might be able to reclaim a lot of the West. It was very Pyrrhic for reasons that are not appropriate to a literary discussion, but the point is Justinian really is this, well, bright star, and that takes us right into our text. So after that, Constantine the eagle turned against the course of heaven, which it had followed. So the eagle, the Roman symbol of conquest, even from the Republican times, turns it against the church to the, to the, as Dante would see it, to the good guys, to the church. And so you have developing in Byzantium the double-headed eagle idea. And this is a perfect motif of East or West, how Dante would see this. So the double-headed eagle, which actually exists in Habsburg iconography as well. One eagle represents the Roman Empire, and one eagle represents the church. And they form a curious-looking animal, but one that nevertheless operates together. I'm sure you've seen variations of this. And this goes back to themes that we've picked away at for quite a while. But in a nutshell, this idea that where Christ was born was not random. It was not random. And whilst a lot of modern Christians would not blink about asserting the unique role of the Hebrew people and the unique election of the Hebrew people and the connection that Christ in the flesh has to those people, a lot of modern Christians would not just question, but would actually vocally denounce this fondness for the Roman Empire. And yet the incarnation, which Dante would see, especially, medieval Catholic, Mary devotion and so forth, would see the incarnation as the turning point of history. More so, in fact, than the crucifixion or the resurrection, because you don't have those if you don't have an incarnation, right? In Dante's Catholicism, the incarnation takes the greatest weight. And you can go to church and hear their justification for that. But the point is, the incarnation, which has such medieval weight on it, sees not just a special election of the Hebrews, but also a special election of the Roman Empire in which Christ was born. And so those themes, which indeed historically were sometimes quite tense with persecutions and such, those themes are nevertheless eventually reconciled, as Dante would see it, through providence. And so we have Justinian mentioning the Roman eagle. Against the course of heaven which had followed, behind the ancient, who Lavinia took 200 years and more, the bird of God, in the extreme of Europe, held itself, near to the mountains whence it issued first. And under shadow of the sacred plumes it governed there the world from hand to hand, and changing thus upon mine own alighted Caesar I was, and am Justinian. So I was Caesar. I was a title. I think this is a nod to Justinian's reform of the legal code. Everything legal has to do with titles and the obligations and such related to titles, an area of interest of mine. But Caesar I was, but I'm dead. So I don't have any titles on earth. I don't have any flattering statuses. I was Caesar. I still am Justinian. And this gets into something we can maybe approach later, but one doesn't stop being themselves in heaven. And so part of that is identity of the individual. I am Justinian. And that's just like Picarda's question of how can you be completely happy if there's a hierarchy in heaven and some people are farther away from God? And how can that be? But heaven's total happiness. Aren't you less happy than someone else? And Picardo resolves that. at least massages that for us. Likewise, with this reference, I was Caesar, I am Justinian, we are confronted, we don't have to answer it now, but we are confronted with this reality of how can one be a product of theosis, of deification through grace. How can one be completely transformed by Christ and be filled with Christ and be subsumed in Christ, like in the Western liturgy, the water dropped into the wine to represent the soul being subsumed in the divine, amongst other symbolisms there. How can that be the case? And I'm still Justinian, right? How do you not? Well, I mean, this is one of the most fundamental religious questions of all. The one versus the many is one way to phrase that. But how can you still be you and yet be completely subsumed by God's love and light? So anyway, we'll just introduce that there. And I think Dante is doing just as much here. Caesar I was and am Justinian, who by the will of the primal love I feel took from the laws the useless and redundant. And by the way, I should say these opening lines are a very tight representation of the progress of the Roman Empire, which we'll see a bit more later. And errant to the work I was attendant, one nature to exist in Christ, not more. Believed, and with such faith I was contented. But blessed Agapetus, he who was the supreme pastor to the faith sincere, pointed me out the way by words of his. So he was in a heresy, like kind of this deviation from Christian thinking, and he's reminded by the Pope of this error, or what the true teaching is, as Dante would lay it out. Him I believed, and what was his assertion I now see clearly, even as thou seest each contradiction to be false and true. We can get into the East and West discussion of authority here. Obviously, Dante is coming from a Western angle, so notice that the Eastern emperor is looking in this presentation to the West for his spiritual guidance. There's a lot of nuance here that we don't need to digress into too much, but I do want to make a point out there. Because all of that is tied up into a lot of those discussions of the Roman Empire after Constantine, and who has the imperium. In Arabic, we say who has the haq, who has the authority of Rome, the same Rome that God favored with the incarnation. Where does that go? And if you really are interested in this, you can read an essay by Dante himself called De Monarchia, where he really fleshes out his whole idea of where that imperium traveled post-Constantine. As soon as with the church I moved my feet, God in his grace it pleased with his high task to inspire me, and I gave me wholly to it. And to my Bacillarius I commanded, the arms to which was heaven's right so joined. It was a signal that I should repose. Now here to the first question terminates my answer, but the character thereof constrains me to continue with a sequel. In order that thou see with how great reason men move against the standard sacrosanct, both who appropriate and who oppose it, behold how great a power has made it worthy of reverence, beginning from the hour when Palestine to give it sovereignty. Thou knowest it made in Alba its abode. This is the eagle. So he's talking about the symbol of the eagle. Now we get this very interesting explanation of the Roman Empire. 300 years and upward till at last, 3 to 3 fought for it yet again, and thou knowest what it achieved from Sabian wrong down to Lucretia's sorrow in 7 kings, or coming round about the neighboring nations. Thou knowest, he's giving, very much like Virgil did in the Aeneid, he's giving this blow by blow of Roman history. And anyone from Dante's class and background would know all of these major figures in ancient Roman. I'm talking ancient, almost mythical, ancient, like 5th century, 6th century, 7th century BC figures. Down to Lucretia's sorrow in the 7 kings, or coming round about the neighboring nations. Thou knowest what it achieved, borne by the Romans illustrious against Brennus against Pyrrhus, against the other princes and confederates. Torquatus thence and Quinctilius, who from Locks upkempt was named Dacia and Fabii, received the fame I willingly in Ballum. It struck to earth the pride of the Arabians, who, following Hannibal, had passed across the Alpine ridges, Po, from which thou glidest. Beneath it triumphed whilst they were yet young, Pompey and Scipio, to the hill beneath which thou wast born, Florence. Talking about Pompey and Scipio during the war, up a little bit north Italy there. Then near unto thy time when heaven had willed to bring the whole world to its mood serene, did Caesar by the will of Rome assume it. What it achieved from Var unto the Rhine, Irsa beheld, and Sion beheld the Seine, and every valley whence the Rhone is filled, what it achieved when it had left Ravenna, and leapt the Rubicon, was such a flight that neither tongue nor pen could follow it. And he goes on to Aurum Domine miserere nobis. So those are some of the major themes. In the subsequent cantos, we're going to have a look at the rulers. We're going to come across Judas Maccabee. We're going to come across some other figures that Dante has a great regard for. And again, notice this hierarchy that we have as well. With that, we're through for this presentation for the one student. I especially invite any questions or correspondence by email. And I do as much to the rest of you who have enjoyed this freebie class, this sample class of the type of instruction you can expect at Apocystus Institute. Have a great day.